Hello, and welcome to this edition of Bring the World Home. My name is Richard Pizzullo, and I will be your host for this show, a show about the experiences of Peace Corps volunteers who have served in one of the 139 countries that Peace Corps has assisted since its beginning in 1960. Our guest tonight is Kate Waijatelika, who served in Sri Lanka from 1984 to 1986. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you.
Really happy to have you on the show tonight.
Thanks for inviting me.
And before we start, I'd like to just show our audience where Sri Lanka is in comparison to Hawaii. Hawaii is here, and we are going to go around the globe to just off the southern coast of India to Sri Lanka. Now, I'm wondering if you could start tonight by telling us a little bit about Sri Lanka.
Sure. Sri Lanka is just that little teardrop island off of India. It's about 300 miles tall and 200 miles wide, about 20 million people, two main ethnicities. About 80% are the Buddhist Sinhalese, and about 18% are Tamil Hindus, and then the rest are Muslim or Christian or different. Sri Lanka is most famous for being a tea producer. If you've heard of Ceylon tea, that's where they grow that. It's actually still called Ceylon tea, but it's from Sri Lanka. They also produce rubber and coconuts, and they have a textile industry. You get a lot of clothing from Sri Lanka. If you look at your tags, it'll often say made in Sri Lanka. And they're a socialist democracy. They've been experiencing a civil war for probably longer than any other country. It started with the British. When the British finally left them, they were a colony, and when the British finally left them, it started with ethnic strife at that time because the minority had been put into the vast majority of the higher jobs. Mm-hmm. So that war has been going. It was going on during my service, and it's still going on. And
Ceylon tea, I guess that gives us a hint that it used to be called Ceylon before it was Sri Lanka.
Right.
So what inspired you to join the Peace Corps? And did you know you were going to Sri Lanka? Did you ask to go there? Or?
Well, you don't get a choice necessarily of your country of service. They offer you a place and then you can accept it or not. So I didn't know I was going to Sri Lanka until I got that assignment. My father actually was a huge influence in my life, and he said, I have four sisters. You guys have grown up with food and clothing and shelter, and you've never had to worry about that. And so you owe it to the world to spend at least one summer working in a developing country. So when I was 14, I went off and worked in Honduras for a summer. Later, I worked in college for a summer in Lesotho in Africa. And then those two experiences were so wonderful that all I wanted to do when I graduated was be a Peace Corps volunteer. And so I didn't care what my career was, I just wanted to be a Peace Corps volunteer. So I was thrilled when I got accepted.
Oh, and how were you prepared for this assignment, and what was your assignment? I mean, how did the Peace Corps get you ready for living and working in Sri Lanka, and what did you actually do there?
The job was to work with adult students who wanted to be English teachers. After the British left, English was thrown out as the official language, and they went back to Sinhala as the official language and Tamil as the secondary language. But shortly thereafter, they realized to do business in the world economy, we need English. So all of a sudden, they wanted English back again, and the students had not had the background. So we were there to train adults, just 1 year booster course in English. And then the adults who got that course, they agreed that they would go out into remote areas for 2 years and do their own sort of Peace Corps service as teaching English in distant areas of the country. The training itself was outstanding. Peace Corps really, rocks in that way. They gave us a 3-month training, both language and culture and our job training, how to teach English, how was the most effective way. At that time, they were trying to introduce they wanted to introduce what's called the communicative method of teaching English. And so it was more role playing and that kind of thing. So.
And you learned the local language as part of your training, and which was?
The local language that I learned was the majority language called Sinhala, and they trained us hours a day, and it's a very hard language. It's long words, like please is karunakarala. It's just giant. But they also offered, after the 3 months of language training, to pay a local teacher to work with us privately. So I took language lessons for all 2 years, and really got to be great friends with the family of my retired teacher, this old man. He taught me, and he actually taught me to read and write in Sinhala, which was a lot of fun.
Wow, and you were able to learn to speak the language in the 3 months that you were...
That gave me a good boost, but
see.
we needed to get out there and really practice. I think one of the delights of being in the Peace Corps was discovering that I could learn a language. I didn't think I was good at languages until I really worked on that language, and now I feel semi-fluent. A little bit.
And what did the local people think about you being there as a Peace Corps volunteer, single woman?
Well, that was shocking to them. I think they couldn't believe my parents could be so irresponsible to let me go off by myself halfway around the world. That part was shocking for them, but I think because I was a teacher, that bestowed the respect that all teachers in the country get. And I lived with a family, so I sort of became the adopted daughter. And I think they were very, the older generation had been exposed to the British. So I felt a little bit that they were almost too nice to me in a way. They were overly respectful of the fact that I was white. And then there was a generation a little bit lower who saw the whiteness and didn't really appreciate that. I do remember, a couple of incidents that were awkward. But for the most part, certainly in the town that I lived in, I think they loved me as a person who would come and join their efforts to help improve the English. So.
Oh, that's good. And I mean, how did they accept Americans generally? I mean, were we liked in Sri Lanka?
Well, yeah, they loved President Kennedy. You still see pictures of Kennedy in people's houses. And a lot of their knowledge, though, came from pop culture movies. It's not necessarily a good thing for how they see women, but pretty well. There was... You're also the target of the bad guys too, right? Because you stand out. I mean, it was a country of brown-skinned people, and I was white. I stood out. In fact, that was probably the hardest thing for me, is I would really have loved to have been just an anonymous teacher, but instead it was this big deal wherever I went and whatever I did. But I do remember there was a time on the bus where I could feel, we had to stand on the bus holding the bar, and I could feel there was a thief behind me going for my purse. And so I turned around and looked at him, and his face confirmed that he was going for my bag. So I started saying, "Horu inua, e mage bag e kagannoa." And instead of getting the help that I was asking for, everybody started laughing that I could speak the language and, saying to themselves, how does she know our language? So it didn't actually help, except for, I guess, it stopped the crime. And then when I got off the bus, I saw that he had sliced my bag with a razor.
Oh my goodness! And they were more interested in the fact that you could speak the language than you getting robbed. And very interesting. And
crazy.
And what was it like living there? I mean, how much were you paid, and what was your life like as a volunteer? I mean, did you live a life of luxury or? Well,
we had, they paid us $100 a month, which was more than enough, but it's the equivalent of a teacher salary over there. I couldn't spend that much because I was living with a family and they fed me, and life over there was really neat. The house I lived in, I shared a room with the sister. We had mosquito nets over our beds, so we'd at night hear these bugs zzz, and you knew it was on your net. That was creepy. But they usually have squat toilets, but for me they actually put in a regular toilet. And I'll never forget the time I woke up in the morning, I was about to sit down on that toilet, and I looked in it, and there was a rat in there. And I got so scared, I just flushed him, and he went spinning around the toilet, and at the end he was still there, but he was like, "What did you do to me, lady?" But anyway, the life was very nice. They cooked over a wood stove. They did not have refrigeration, so the food was cooking food was laborious. They plucked the coconut, they ground it, squeezed the coconut milk, and every day they did this for all the meals. So I was very appreciative. I lived with a wonderful family, and they truly adopted me like a daughter, and I am in great touch with them today.
So you lived with the family the whole time you were there?
Yep.
I see. And they cooked for you?
Yep.
So food, topic I like. What was some of the food like? I mean, you were talking about coconut cream.
Well, yeah,
but
the milk, yeah. They make curries, but they make them very spicy. So for the first 2 weeks, we had a really hard time eating anything because it was so hot. It would turn our lips blue and make our nose and eyes run. It was crazy. But when we got used to it, it was wonderful. They eat with their hands. They have sort of a pile of rice and then the different curries around it, and you mix it in, and there's a certain way to do that that's appropriate, and we picked that up. And then you could hear the food sellers go by on their bicycles. You could hear the fish guy coming by saying, "Malu, Malu," and that meant the fish guy was there, and if you want Malu, you go out and say, "Malu." He comes by and he chops you up some of his fish. Same thing with other things. You could hear them riding their bikes by with their different foods. So they also had the beautiful outdoor markets filled with vegetables and fruits. And one of my favorite things to do is go down there and practice trying to bargain, because you're not supposed to pay the regular price that they ask for. It's a kind of a game. And I found it a lot of fun trying to bargain.
Sounds very nice. What? Tell me a little bit about the students that you taught. You were saying that they were adults who wanted to learn English. I mean, and it was a one-year program.
Right.
So what happened to those students? I mean, what were some of the? They went off to become English teachers.
English teachers, right.
So you must have had 2 classes.
Well, there were 2 of us in my town who were Peace Corps volunteers, and we were partnered up with 2 or 3, it depended, other local teachers, and the group of us would divide our 100 kids into 4 classes, and each take them for an hour. So every day I'd have 4 one-hour classes, and it would be speaking, reading, writing, or listening. And so we devised different lessons, and the students were tremendously respectful, beautiful, beautiful students. It was a cruise job, very easy because they were so lovely. And in fact, they brought us to tears because at the end of the year, they all fell down and worshiped on the ground right before us in waves. And it was the most amazing thing. I just started bawling. But I do remember my worst lesson, or my biggest disaster, was we were studying how to describe faces, like furrowed brow or cleft chin or broad nose, that kind of thing. And so I thought of this great idea to have a friend of mine come in and steal my purse and run out so that they could then describe the criminal, right? Well, what I hadn't taken account for was heroes. All the guys in the class jumped up and started chasing him. And I was so surprised. I ran after them to stop him. They chased him and chased him. I was chasing after them. Finally, they had him cornered and they were going to beat him up. I said, "No, stop, stop, stop. It's my fault." Oh, they were furious. They said, "Miss, it was the stupidest lesson you have ever given."
So much for that lesson.
No, it didn't go well.
Didn't happen again, I guess.
But they were wonderful students.
Yeah.
And they're doing fine.
And do you keep in touch with any of those students? Do you still hear from them?
Yes, I do, a couple of them, and we're going to be going back this summer, so I hope I'll see some of them. We'll look them up.
Good.
But yeah, after they did their 2 years of service in a remote area, they were invited to a school of their choice, I think.
The first goal of Peace Corps is, of course, providing training and technology transfer and helping people develop their countries. How do you feel you contributed? Do you feel satisfied that your service was successful?
I do, because when you're living day in and day out in a town, aside from the fact that you're sort of like forgive me for the exaggeration, but a little bit like a movie star where they watch everything you do and they comment on it. For the most part, because I was working with the adults that I was working with in the school, and I also coached gymnastics on the side with the children. Because I was doing that, all the kids would spread little stories about who I was. And I really tried to appreciate and respect the fact that I was representing not just myself and my family, but my country. And I think they got to know me. And yeah, I think they also appreciated the fact that I wasn't ashamed to make a fool of myself with trying the language and that kind of thing. So.
And since you've been back for quite a few years now. Yeah.
20 years.
And you mentioned you're going back. Have you been back to Sri Lanka at all?
Let's see. We went back once with the children, and it had changed a lot, but I expect that was 10 years ago. So we're going back in June for a wedding, and I think it'll be very different. I'm afraid a little bit to be sad by that, but
And we should mention that you married somebody from Sri Lanka.
did.
Correct.
I
Yeah.
did.
What was that like? I mean,
Well, you know, fantastic and also challenging. I think we underestimate cultural differences. I mean, they come up even in styles of arguing. I was fascinated when I was trying to teach my adult students writing. I was telling them logically you would have intro, body, conclusion. You know, that's really not the way they talk or argue or make their point. They have a more circuitous way of getting their point across. So that comes through even when my husband and I are arguing. I'm trying to go right for the point. He's going this way. So yeah, it's interesting.
and you were telling me earlier about a story where you were trying to organize a surprise party, and again,
Yes.
the cultural differences.
Yes. Well, they say yes and no. Well, yes is, yes is this, and no is this. There's very little difference. So I was trying to explain, I was going to throw a surprise birthday party for my friend, and I told his mother, I'm going to go distract him and bring him over to the library so that when his friends come, he won't know. You keep the friends there and hide them so that when we come back, they can all say surprise, and then we'll have a party. So she said this. I thought that meant yes. It looked like a yes to me. At any rate, I distract him, I time it, we go back, and I'm waiting for the big surprise, and no one was there. And I asked her, where were they? And she said, oh, they came, but you guys weren't here, so they left. I'd taken an hour bus ride to get this fancy cake, and I just started crying.
Wow.
Oh, well.
And on a more serious note, you were talking earlier about when you introduced the country, you're talking about the Tamil region of Sri Lanka and the longest civil war in history.
Yep.
Tell me, you know, were you in any danger because the Tamils, I understand, strike anywhere in Sri Lanka, including the capital city, Colombo. Were you ever in any danger? And what is the Civil War about, for those who don't know?
Well, the foreigners are never targeted, and in fact, if they have an opportunity to remove the foreigners, they would. But we were only in danger if we were in the wrong place at the wrong time, so we didn't feel really in danger. I do remember one time riding on a bus with my partner, and I said, what are you thinking right now? And she said, well, I was just wondering if that thing over there was, you know, going to be a bomb. And I said, oh, funny, I was thinking how easy it would be to lob a grenade over that wall into the hotel. We both had these war images in our mind, which was a little weird, but you know, for the most part, we never felt endangered, and the only hard part I thought in that regard was that the war engenders so much bitterness and hatred, as any war does, and so there was tremendous bitterness in unexpected places. People would say things that you wondered, yikes, I hope they didn't mean that.
And what was the war about? Where did it stem from?
When the British were there, they hired the people who were going to learn English the fastest and the best, and the minority had the motivation to do that. So the minority Tamils got a lot of the high positions in the government. When the British left, the majority said, why is there such a disproportionate number of Tamils in these high positions? It should be, you know, 18% of them and 80% of us, since those are our proportions. So that's where the clash started. But since then, there have been acts of horror on both sides, and I just think I wish it would just stop. It's pretty sad. The tsunami was an awakener, because it nailed the whole country, and especially the South and the East. There was just so much sadness there. So I was hoping maybe that would make everybody realize, you know what, there's bigger things out there. We need to stop this craziness.
And the tsunami, as you say, impacted the entire, swept right over the entire island, correct?
All around the edges.
Oh, I see, around the edges. And have you had any contact? I mean, your husband obviously must have family. Did he have any family affected? Or
there's a Sri Lankan community in Hawaii of probably 100 people, and we get together with them you know, maybe almost once a month for potluck curry dinners and that kind of thing. And among that community, yes, we had relatives who were lost and had their houses damaged. But My husband did go down after that and work to try to, people had sent him money to use as seed money to restart businesses. So he had read about this woman who was trying to start a rope making business and had been washed away. So he found her and he bought her the supplies to restart her rope making business, and she was able to employ 6 other women to get that started again. That kind of thing. Or like the guy who sells fish on the bike, he was able to replace their bikes, that kind of stuff.
Very good.
So he did some good stuff. And Bill Clinton goes down. He's been there at least twice, and everybody loves Bill Clinton.
Oh, well, good. And what did some of the other volunteers do there? I mean, how many volunteers were in Sri Lanka when you were there? And what were some of the other type of projects they were working on?
You know what? We just were invited by the government to do that one project. They were reintroducing Sri Lanka after a period of time away. So that was the one project we were doing, and we were the third of, I don't know, 6 groups that participated in that. It was, you know, really trying to reinfuse the country with English teachers. And it's since that program has phased out. But, yeah.
So there's no volunteers there today?
I think currently because of the Civil War, they do not have anyone there. But
And why were they trying to get so many English-speaking teachers? What was the reason for that?
well, they had their eyes opened about how if you want to do business in the bigger world, you need a language that most people can speak, and by default it's become English, which is too bad since it's such a hard language to learn. But so they needed to really reinvigorate that aspect of education.
I see. And, you know, I think I read that Sri Lanka's got one of the highest per capita incomes in South Asia. So, you know, how did people live? I mean, were they, I mean, a lot of developing countries, people are living in houses made out of traditional building materials, leaf or, you know, sticks.
Yeah, not so much that.
Yeah, so what was the standard of living like there for?
Far better than I expected. I mean, really, the houses were quite lovely, and there is a population of beggar caste, I guess, and I guess according to Buddhism, that's the way they're staying. They're not really infused with that idea of, you know, let me get an education and better myself. It's really not that mentality. It's, I'm a beggar this life, and I'll be a good beggar, and I'll do good deeds, and then next life I'll be born something else. So I think for the groups, the majority who go to school and everything, they do really value education. They spend hours at school, and then they go off in the afternoons, and they take extra class that they call tuition, extra classes to learn. There are only a few universities there, or there were at the time. I think there were only 3 universities, and only the best and the brightest could go. So a huge portion of very bright people who would love to go to college don't have a college to go to.
So there was only that one program for those 2 years in Sri Lanka,
yes.
and then that was, but there had been a program
There had been other things before.
I
yeah.
see.
Yeah.
And of course, as you said earlier, the tea industry is very big, and
Right.
Ceylon tea is world famous. And were you able to see any of those industries?
Yes, we got to go up into the hill country and see how they did it, and you can still see the workers. That's originally how the Tamil, I hope I'm not wrong on this, but that's how the Tamils came, as the British brought them over as tea pickers. And so that's how a large portion of the Tamils came over. There were other waves of Tamils that came over. But anyway, they're still today picking the tea by hand, and then they have very specific ways of drying it to get the qualities they want. It's beautiful.
And the coconut industry, I worked in a number of countries where they had a lot of coconut and, of course, turned it into copra.
Right.
But the thing I remember hearing about Sri Lanka is they used to run wires or ropes in between the coconut trees.
Yes.
So they didn't have to climb each coconut tree. They climb one and then go across from one tree to the next. I mean,
that's right.
Have you seen that?
I have seen that. That's right. And you reminded me also of the fishermen. There's the fishermen often they go out and they stand on these poles out in the water and fish from these poles. So all day long they're on a very narrow pole. And they actually don't really know how to swim. Most Sri Lankans don't value swimming, and they don't. So the fishermen who go out in boats, if their boat tips over, that's it.
That's it.
Yeah.
Wow.
So.
And what would you say to somebody who was thinking about joining the Peace Corps? Obviously, they're not going to be able to go to Sri Lanka.
Not
there's,
right now.
There's, I think, 75 countries that the Peace Corps is currently assisting. And what would you say to somebody who was thinking about it? I mean,
I wish we could make it mandatory. I just think it's such a valuable experience. I'm sure you do too, because you're a return volunteer. But for one thing, it's a cushy way to travel because you get to learn everything about the country while you're being supported with training, medical needs, or we had a doctor. So how can you not appreciate the fact that you get to go to another country, live there, learn everything? You're contributing, but you're also well supported by the Peace Corps.
And were there volunteers from any other countries there that you got to know? Or?
A little bit. Australia had some, and that's about all I can remember. But yeah.
And what was the most rewarding part of this assignment over the 2 years?
Well, certainly the people. You can't, beat the relationships you create. But I also learned a lot about meditation. I spent a week in a meditation center trying just to meditate for 8 hours a day, which was really weird and wild. And I came out of there so mellow, I don't think anyone would recognize me. But, learning about Buddhism, learning about meditation, the relationships. I felt great about the job. I loved my gymnastic kids. And then just feeling like that part of the world is home.
And the biggest challenge?
I think it was just being white in a brown country. I really became self-conscious. I don't generally like that much attention, and that was hard.
And you'd do it all over again?
Oh, yes, absolutely. In fact, I kind of want to. When my husband and I are older, I'd love to go with him and do it because there were older Peace Corps volunteers, like in their 60s, and I thought, wow, I want to do that.
And that's a good point. The Peace Corps does accept volunteers of all ages, and they're especially encouraging retirees or people who are in their mid-careers.
And certainly the other country values tremendously the older volunteers more than the younger. We're just whippersnappers, but the older guys have true life experience. It's highly valued.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Kate.
You're welcome.
It's been very interesting, and I hope that we've helped our audience get a better understanding of that goal that Peace Corps has of Americans getting to understand people of other countries better. But I also hope that we've encouraged some people to become part of the 139,000 people who have already served in the Peace Corps. We hope that they will be motivated and join, and at least consider joining the Peace Corps. Thank you. Look forward to seeing you again in the next edition of Bring the World Home.
Atere ayale giye jeevite obini pal ganuni abisarika vanne aataraya yanwadane manulove මිනිසත් භවයේ මහිම බින්නි දැන්නුනේ අයාලේ ගිය ජීවිතේ ඔබෙනි පල ගැනුනේ අභිසාරිකාවන්නේ උන්මාදනෙත් නතරේ අයාලේ ගිය ජීවිතේ ඔබෙනි පල ගැනුනේ අභිසාරික